A number of years ago at one of the previous churches that I served at, we had what's called a progressive dinner. Have you ever been to a progressive dinner? Anybody ever been to a progressive dinner? Okay, you may have had some here. Have you had one here at First Church over the years? Well, we had one, and it was for anyone in the entire church that wanted to be part of the progressive dinner. It wasn't just for a Sunday school class. It was for everyone. It really was a wonderful way for folks in the life of the church to get to know one another. So how progressive dinner goes is that you have multiple people in the church that would say they would do kind of the hors d'oeuvres portion of the meal. And so you would have 3 or 4 other families that would come to everyone's houses, or each those houses, and you would have your hors d'oeuvres. Well, then another group of people in the church would say they would provide the main course, and so you would go somewhere else for the main course, and then someone else would say that they would provide the dessert, and so you would go there for the dessert, and then normally you would all come back together at the very end. Hopefully, if things worked out right, and if the timing was right, you would all come back together and you would spend a little bit of time together. And so we had a progressive dinner, and it was, for this church, it was a big deal. I mean, there were, for this church, a lot of people that were involved in the progressive dinner. Well, it just so happened that we had signed up for the main course portion of the meal. Well, life happened leading up to the day of the progressive dinner. Life happened. We had basketball games the week before, and even the evening before we had basketball games. The kids were both in school, and so it was they were having tests there right before Christmas. It was the Christmas season for a pastor and his family. Life was just crazy and hectic that season and that week leading up to that Saturday evening progressive dinner. Well, so Saturday rolled around and we realized, oh my, I had not yet gone to the store. I had not gone to go get I believe it was a brisket that we were making, and it takes about 12 hours to cook that brisket. And so, I mean, it was crazy that day. Oh, by the way, did I say that we had 2 younger children, and so we had to clean up the house with, including their rooms? I mean, it was just a chaotic day. And finally, the time arrived for us to go to our hors d'oeuvre house. Well, we didn't have time to go to the hors d'oeuvre house. We had to call them and say, hey, we're running a little late, so we'll be ready for people to come to our house at the main course. And people arrived at our house for the main course, and we were not ready for them. The brisket wasn't quite done. The potatoes weren't quite done. Fortunately, the house was clean, but we weren't quite ready. And if there's anything that I hate more, if there's something that I hate more than anything, it is being late or not being ready. I hate that. I hate being late or not being ready. Well, today we're continuing this sermon series, telling these stories using a felt board that really, we often view them as children's stories. These are stories that show up in children's Bible books and things like that. These are stories that are told to children. They're easy to understand, and we often think that those stories they're just children's stories, but we've come to recognize that these have significant theological meaning. These stories have significant theological meaning. And so today's story is really a fairly simple story. However, because we are so far removed from that culture, for some of us it doesn't quite make sense. We think about a wedding, and what in the world is all of this with all of the 10 virgins, as it says in the New International Version and the English Standard Version. Others call them bridesmaids, and what is all of that about, and what's the whole thing with the oil and the lamps and all that? Doesn't quite make sense. So let me set the stage here for you just a bit. So in a wedding in that culture, there were really 3 stages to a wedding, for a wedding to take place. First, there was the engagement. And these were almost always prearranged marriages between families. Oftentimes, it was almost seen as much of a financial transaction as it was love. I mean, that was a little bit foreign to them, was a whole romantic kind of love. I mean, they understood that to some degree, but marriages were not necessarily based on that, or at least in the beginning, that's not how marriages came to be. Marriages came to be because there was an arrangement between two families. Typically, it would be families of the same village. They would have, and obviously Jesus is talking to his Jewish disciples, and so they would have understood what it would have meant. It would have been two Jewish families in a small village. They would have said, okay, our daughter is going to marry your son, or our son is going to marry your daughter. And that marriage would be prearranged. Typically, those prearranged marriages would start when the children were quite young. Possibly even toddlers, but oftentimes they would wait until the preteen years, and the families would make an arrangement. And oftentimes these prearranged marriages took place between families that were kind of on the same plane level, or the same kind of level socially and financially. Oftentimes, however, if there was some financial differences, it would create significant burdens on the poor family, because money would have to be paid to the other family, because you would not want your child marrying into a poor family. I mean, can you imagine such a thing? And so most of the time, the families were socially and financially, they were typically kind of on the same level. And so after the engagement was formally announced, and there was a financial arrangement that was made, especially for the parents of the son would typically pay the parents of the daughter. I mean, again, women were in that culture, certainly not today, and we do not condone this, but women were seen as property. Women were seen as property, and so there was a financial kind of arrangement that took place. So that was the engagement part. And then there was the betrothal part. And so as couples were betrothed to one another, typically they were young teenagers, probably not preteen, but probably 13, 14, maybe up to 18 years old. You were getting really old if you waited to be 18 before you were betrothed. And so during the betrothal process, what would take place is that the couples would exchange vows. And typically it would have taken place in the synagogue, or possibly even in parts of the temple. The priest would have been there, or some other religious leader would have been there. They would have taken their vows in front of one another, and then that was a legally binding thing. And so if the man of the relationship died, the woman would have been known as a widower, or as a widow. I mean, they were officially, there was an official arrangement that took place. However, the relationship was not consummated. They did not live with one another. So over the next year, what happened then was that the man would then begin to prepare his new home. Typically, he had been living with his parents up to that point. He would find a home. He would prepare that home for his bride-to-be, or his betrothed wife at that point. Again, they had not come together as a couple yet. They were waiting until the time was right. And there would be signs that it was coming closer to the time of the actual wedding day. There would be signs. I mean, so if the young man had been able to give enough money, and had been able to raise enough money to give to his soon-to-be mother and father-in-law, that would have been a sign. After he gave that gift, people would know that it's getting closer and closer to the wedding. The village would be able to see that he had made all the preparations in his home, in the house. It was ready for a woman to come and live there with him. That would be another sign. It would be a sign if he had taken his soon-to-be wife. If he had taken her a special gift, it was another sign that the marriage was getting ready to take place. But no one knew when the marriage was actually going to occur. And it really was a marriage and a wedding a wedding celebration is really what it was. And so on the day of the wedding celebration, no one would know when this was going to occur, but typically people would know kind of around the time frame, again, because they would be able to see the signs that this was getting ready to occur. And so the bride would gather together her bridesmaids, and almost always there were 10 in the Jewish culture. They loved those round numbers. We find evidence even in ancient historians that talk about 10 bridesmaids. It was almost always 10 bridesmaids that they had in Jewish weddings. So the bridesmaids would be waiting there. And so then, when the big moment arrived, no one really knew when it would occur, but when the moment arrived, one of the groom's friends would run down the street and shout out, "The groom is coming, the groom is coming," and then everyone would know that was the beginning of the great celebration. The groom then would come and he would get the bride along with all of her bridesmaids, and they would process through the village streets. And it was almost always done at midnight, in the very dead of the night, so that they could fill those narrow alleyways with significant light from all of these torches and all of these lamps. It was symbolic of bringing light into this couple's lives. And then they would arrive typically at the mother and father-in-law's house. The mother and father of the groom, they would typically arrive at their house, and then would begin the great celebration. There would be a large banquet. There would be dancing all night. This would possibly even go on for days and days and days until the best man would come. Probably when he was prompted, he would come and he would take the hand of the bride and place it on the hand of the groom, and that was the sign that everyone was to leave. End of that public wedding, and then finally the couple would finally be able to be together as husband and wife. So as Jesus tells the story, he tells the story. We're in that last section. We're in that marriage section, that wedding section. Again, the engagement had already taken place. The betrothal period had already taken place. And here was that last evening when everyone knew that it was around the corner, sometime very soon, this great wedding celebration was about to take place. And so as Jesus tells the story, there are 5 wise bridesmaids, and there are 5 foolish bridesmaids. Notice it doesn't say that there are 5 good bridesmaids and there are 5 bad bridesmaids. No, they are simply wise and foolish, meaning they were either prepared or they were unprepared. I think that's important. It doesn't say they were good or bad. They were wise or foolish. They were prepared or they were unprepared. So those who were prepared, they had enough oil to last not only through the night, but likely even into the coming nights, because they weren't exactly sure when the groom was going to be coming. They were always prepared. They had enough oil. Not only did they have enough oil in their lamps, but they brought a small container of oil, and they kept that oil with them. An interesting detail in this story is that they became drowsy and they slept. Not just the foolish became drowsy and they slept, but the wise became drowsy and they slept. I think that means they simply were carrying on their days. They were prepared, but they were carrying on with life. They all had to sleep. They all got tired, and so they were carrying on with all of their lives. Again, the difference was that some were prepared, but there were some who were unprepared. They did not bring enough oil, and as the shout through the street was made, "The groom is coming, the groom is coming," they panicked because they realized that there was not enough oil in their lamps to get them through the evening. Their lamps were already beginning to go out. They were unprepared. And so they went to the prepared bridesmaids and said, "Can we borrow some of your oil?" And they didn't have enough to share. They brought only what was necessary for them. And they knew if they shared their oil, the bride and groom would never get to the mother and father-in-law's house with enough light. There was no way that they could share what they had. Hey, how about this? Go find someone that deals in something like that. And so the 5 foolish bridesmaids, the ones who were unprepared, they thought, well, maybe, just maybe, if we're fast enough, we can make last-minute preparations and we'll be able to catch the procession. Well, the problem is, this is the middle of the night. Who in the world is going to be available and open that's going to sell oil in the middle of the night to these women who are unprepared? And sure enough, they missed the procession, so they got to the mother and father-in-law's house, and they banged on the door, and they were not let in. They were not let in. Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch, therefore, Jesus tells his disciples, for you neither know the day nor the hour. Chapters 24 and 25 of the book of Matthew, Jesus teaches his disciples about his second coming, about the end of time. And he continues to tell them to watch and to be ready. To watch and to be ready. I'm here to tell you, sisters and brothers, Jesus Christ is coming again. This parable and the teachings of Jesus and through all of Scripture, it tells us to watch and to be ready. Read the signs of the time. By the way, he also says, just because someone says, look, the Lord has come over there, or come out to this village, the Lord has arrived over here. Don't go, he says. Just as you can see that the storm clouds are beginning to develop and you know that rain is coming, we need to be able to discern the times. Here's what I've come to realize. The New Testament writers thought that the second coming of Jesus was imminent. There are times when it seems as though Paul believed, he almost believed, that Jesus would be coming back within days. It's been almost 2,000 years. And so we're beginning to lose heart, and we wonder, is this just really a myth that was made up by the biblical authors? Jesus is talking in parables. Do we even understand what he's talking about? Here's what I know. I have no idea when Jesus is going to come back, but I do know this. I have no idea when that day will come when I am standing before him face to face. I have no idea when that's going to happen. It may happen on my way home from church today. There may be an accident. I have no idea. I have no idea. Maybe a heart attack in the middle of my sermon right here. I have no idea. I know this. I better be prepared every single moment. Every single moment. And each one of us better be prepared every single moment. We don't know when our time is up. We don't know when our day of meeting Jesus face to face will arrive. Jesus may come back. We may die. We have no idea, but we know this. We don't know the hour and we don't know the day. Jesus tells his followers time and again, be prepared. And what that means is this. Make sure that your heart is in the right place. Don't rely upon decisions of days gone by. Maxie Dunham, one of my favorite authors, says this about this parable. When the 5 foolish virgins discovered that they were out of oil, the first thing they did was to ask to borrow oil from their friends. Some might regard the wise virgins as selfish for not sharing their oil, but their responsibility was to light the way for the bridegroom. Jesus was making the point that there are some things we must provide for ourselves. They cannot be borrowed. Too many people try to live on borrowed religion. Their parents' religion, their spouse's religion, their pastor's religion. But the only faith that will sustain us today and tomorrow and in the time of judgment is our own faith. He continues, some of us are a quart low when it comes to having oil in our spiritual lamps. We're depending upon having filled up with oil 25 or 30 years ago. We have Bibles, but we refuse to read them. We belong to the church, but the church is not a vital part of our lives. It's an institution we support, but we give little attention and effort to allowing the Christ of the church to shape our lives. Unless something changes, the day may come when, because we've refused to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, the door will be locked and we will be kept from attending the kingdom banquet. Dear sisters and brothers in Christ, be prepared. We must not. We cannot simply go about our lives thinking of Jesus every now and then, thinking that our faith is just something part of our lives. Dear brothers and sisters, our faith must be at the very center of our lives. Because if not, we will be unprepared for that day in which we stand before the Lord Jesus. And oh, how I pray that none of us would hear those words, "Go away from me, for I never knew you." But instead, we would all hear the words, "Come into this kingdom, a place that I have prepared for you." Would you bow with me?